The German soldiers made a very unpleasant discovery in 1941. They got acquainted with the real Russian winter. At that time, the Germans had no idea that it was so cold with lots of snow. It was a complete surprise to the Europeans, and they were completely unprepared to fight in such conditions. After the war, sad memories of the experience in Russia began. They recollected trenches covered with tattered trench coats, and pocket stoves to heat canned food or warm up cold hands. And then the Germans began to realize that light clothing was totally unsuitable for the Russian winter. German generals vied with readers to assure them that the harsh winter had prevented them from winning the war. They had to constantly adapt and learn to fight from the Russians. But it was the tankers who suffered the most. Colonel General Guderian, in his book, Tanks Forward, described in particular detail the use of tank troops. Guderian pointed out that such a harsh winter could not but affect tactics of tank troops. Deep snow forced to move on crests of heights, and when the snow was more than 50 centimeters thick, tanks could not move at all. On the crest of heights, the vehicles were a good target for artillerymen and Soviet tanks. For tank warfare in winter conditions, there are some peculiarities. Here the rules of maintenance and use of equipment changed. Tanks had to be mounted on planks or straw, otherwise the tracks would freeze to the ground. Repair units in winter were overloaded with work, the tracks at low temperatures failed, the movement of the tank at low speed greatly overloaded the engine. The springs and axles often failed, and bumps could not be distinguished under the snow. The batteries were discharging much faster. German tankers would take them out of the vehicle and take them to a warm room. It took several hours to start the engine. Germans first heated tanks with fires, later a special device was developed that made it easier to start the engine. Optical sights fogged up badly, automatic weapons failed due to grease thickening. The Germans did not think in advance about the peculiarities of warfare in winter, and did not prepare for extreme conditions. They were sure of victory before the winter came. As a result, a lot of problems fell on the German head. There were peculiarities in gunfire. The low temperature had an adverse effect on the ballistics of the shot. Consumption of ammunition for firing was 4 times higher than under normal conditions. In deep snow, the effectiveness of the shells decreased. In winter, German tankers traversed water obstacles on ice, established rules experimentally. For the Panther tank, the minimum thickness of ice was 75 centimeters, and for medium tanks only 50 centimeters. Tanks were always driven with open hatches, and part of the crew crossed the ice on foot. The driver had to maintain a distance and a steady speed of 8 kilometers per hour. The Germans began to place dressing stations as close to the front line as possible to deliver the wounded faster, and not to leave them in the cold. In the first winter, the winter ammunition was poorly organized. Surprising is the campaign to collect clothing for the Eastern Front. The task of providing soldiers with clothing for the Russian winter was extremely difficult, and not always solvable.